Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving deep into consciousness with all your neuroscience research, articles, books, everything. We're going to try to figure out just how consciousness emerges from the brain. And we'll even explore some pretty wild ideas like phantom limbs and even the idea that photodiodes could have like a glimmer of awareness.
Yeah, and we're not just going to skim the surface here. We're really going to dig into the nuances of all these theories and research and hopefully piece together a comprehensive picture of consciousness.
Sounds good. So first up, we've got Gerald Edelman's theory of neural Darwinism,
Oh, yeah.
which is based on this idea of neuronal group selection, which sounds a little intimidating at first, but
It's a pretty elegant concept, yeah.
yeah.
You can kind of think of your brain as this bustling city with
Yeah.
all the neurons, like the citizens constantly forming connections and communicating with each other.
Okay, could see that. So then how does that tie into the whole selection process?
Well, just like in a city, not all connections are created equal, right? So as you experience the world, certain groups of neurons that work well together, like they fire in sync and produce meaningful results, those groups get selected for survival, so to speak.
Oh.
They thrive while others kind of fade away. It's very similar to natural selection, but it's happening on this microscopic scale within your brain.
So you're saying that our brains aren't static, they're constantly changing based on our experiences.
Exactly.
Huh. Does that explain why some memories are so vivid, like childhood memories, and others just completely fade away?
Yeah, exactly. The more we revisit a memory or a skill, the stronger those neural connections become. It's like building a path through the forest. The more you walk it, the clearer and more defined it becomes. And Edelman argues that this very process of selection is what shapes our memories and even our sense of self.
Wow, that is mind-blowing. It's like our brains are constantly rewiring themselves based on our experiences. That's incredible. So, okay, we've kind of covered the building blocks of consciousness, but how do all these individual neurons, come together to create, a unified experience?
Right.
That's where this concept of reentry comes in, right?
Right. Exactly.
I have to say, the first time I heard that word, I thought it was something out of a science fiction novel.
It does sound a bit futuristic. But reentry is actually a very fundamental process in the brain. It's this continuous and reciprocal exchange of signals between different brain areas. Imagine a network of roads connecting different parts of a city, allowing for constant communication feedback.
So, okay, so reentry is how our brains integrate information from different areas like sight, sound, touch, emotions, all into one cohesive experience.
Yeah.
It's like the brain is having this constant conversation with itself. Does this relate at all to the binding problem? The whole question of how we perceive an entire object when all the different features of it are processed in separate parts of the brain.
Yeah, that's precisely what makes reentry so fascinating. There's research that shows synchronized firing of neurons in different visual areas when someone's looking at the same object. So it really suggests that this reentry might be the key to solving that binding problem, that is creating a unified perception from this symphony of neural activity.
Okay, that's really cool. So if the brain is like a city and reentry is like the network of roads that are connecting it all, then what are the architects that built this whole intricate structure in the first place?
Right.
That brings us to our next topic, cell adhesion molecules, or CAMs.
Right. And you're right to highlight the importance of structure. CAMs are absolutely essential for brain development. Think of them as the construction workers and the engineers of the brain. They guide the formation of anatomical structures and neural pathways.
So without CAMs, our brains would be wired all wrong.
Yeah, pretty much.
It'd be like trying to build a skyscraper without blueprints or a foundation.
Exactly. They provide the blueprint and the scaffolding for brain development, making sure everything is connected in the right way and that neurons can communicate effectively.
Wow.
What's fascinating is that CAMs can also influence, cell morphology,
right,
and the expression of cell junctions, which adds another layer of complexity to, how our brains are built.
Wow. These tiny molecules play a much bigger role than I ever imagined. Okay, let's move on to the different types of knowledge that our brains handle. We've got, implicit and explicit knowledge, and they seem to operate on two totally different levels. Think about how you can ride a bike without consciously thinking about it. That's implicit memory at work, right? Procedural unconscious knowledge. But researchers have found that even people who can't form new conscious memories can still learn new
Yeah,
skills.
you've hit on a really key point there, the fact that these two systems can operate completely independently.
Mm.
So explicit knowledge is all about conscious awareness.
Hmm.
Like those facts and events you can easily recall and describe. But implicit knowledge operates beneath the surface. Think about learning a new language. You might not be able to articulate all the grammatical rules, but you start to use them correctly anyway.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And there's all that fascinating research on amnesiac patients who they can learn new skills even though they can't form any new, like explicit memories.
Right.
It's crazy. It really highlights how these two types of knowledge are handled by very different brain mechanisms.
Exactly. And we see similar dissociations in patients with perceptual disorders as well, which further reinforces the idea that implicit knowledge operates through different neural pathways than explicit knowledge does.
So, okay, so we've got a brain that's constantly evolving, with different areas communicating through reentry and multiple systems for handling knowledge. This is already a pretty complex picture, and we're just getting started. Now, let's talk about something that has always fascinated me, phantom limbs. How is it possible for people to feel sensations in a limb that's no longer there?
Phantom limb sensations are truly remarkable. They really speak to just how plastic the brain is.
Yeah.
Research on remapping suggests that after a limb is lost, the areas of the brain that used to represent that limb, they don't just go silent. They become responsive to stimulation from neighboring body parts.
Wait, so you're saying that if, like, someone touches the face of a person with a phantom hand, they might actually feel it in their missing hand?
Yeah. It's like the brain has redrawn its internal map.
It's wild, and it really highlights just how adaptable and dynamic the brain is. It's constantly rewiring itself based on experience, even in the face of, like, significant physical changes. But this raises an interesting question. How does the brain know which areas to remap? Like, is there some kind of internal map that's guiding this process?
That is a great question. It's almost like the brain has an innate understanding of the body's layout, and it's constantly trying to make sense of any changes that occur.
Right. Okay, so we've seen how the brain can rewire itself in response to, like, really dramatic changes. But what about the nature of consciousness itself? What is it, and how do we even begin to measure it? That's where integrated information theory comes in, right?
Right. Integrated information theory, or IIT, is this really fascinating attempt to objectively measure consciousness. It was developed by Giulio Tononi, and it basically proposes that consciousness arises from the amount of integrated information within a system, which is represented by the symbol D.
So a system with like it's basically a highly interconnected system where the parts can't be easily separated without losing something fundamental. It's kind of like a tapestry. Each thread contributes to the overall picture, and if you remove one, the whole thing changes.
Precisely. And here's where things get really interesting. According to this theory, even simple systems like photodiodes could exhibit a minimal level of consciousness if they have a certain structure that allows for integrated information.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying that my phone, like, could be minimally conscious?
Yeah.
That's both fascinating and a little unsettling. It really makes you question where the line is between, simple information processing and actual conscious experience.
It's a pretty provocative idea, and there's no definitive evidence to support it yet. But IIT challenges us to think about consciousness in a new way, beyond just the biological realm.
This deep dive is already giving me so much to think about. So we've explored neuronal group selection, reentry, CAMs, implicit and explicit knowledge, phantom limbs, and the very basics of integrated information theory. Each of these concepts is like mind-blowing on its own, but seeing how they all connect paints this really fascinating picture of the brain and consciousness. What's next on our journey?
Well, now that we have a good foundation, we can move on to exploring those brain areas that seem to be most closely linked to conscious experience, and then we can delve into this fascinating world of disorders of consciousness.
I can't wait to see what other secrets these sources hold. Stay tuned, listeners, as we continue our exploration of this very enigmatic world of consciousness.
Picking up where we left off, let's explore some of the brain areas that researchers believe are most closely linked to conscious experience.
Okay, so if we're trying to pinpoint consciousness in the brain, where do we even begin to look? It's not like there's a little light bulb that switches on when we're aware, right?
Not quite. But through, neuroimaging and electrophysiology studies, researchers have identified a network of brain areas that seem to be particularly active when we're conscious. One of these is the thalamus, which acts as the central hub for sensory information.
So the thalamus is kind of like a relay station, receiving information from our senses and then sending it to other parts of the brain for processing. Does that mean it plays a role in like how we become aware of our surroundings?
Yeah, that's the current thinking. Another key player is the posterior cingulate cortex, or PCC, which seems to be involved in self-awareness and internal reflection. Think about those moments when you're daydreaming or just lost in thought. The PCC is likely humming with activity during those times.
It's fascinating that we can actually see these areas like light up on brain scans when someone's engaged in different mental tasks. What about the temporoparietal junction? I've heard that that area is involved in things like out-of-body experiences, which is a pretty wild concept.
The TPJ is a really intriguing area of the brain. It's located where the temporal and parietal lobes meet, and it seems to play a role in our sense of self, our body image, and even our ability to, distinguish between our own perspective and that of others.
That makes me think about disorders of consciousness, which we touched on a little bit earlier. If these areas are damaged or disrupted, it must have like a really profound impact on someone's level of awareness.
Absolutely. Disorders of consciousness present a unique challenge because they really highlight the complexities of measuring and even just defining consciousness. Let's delve a little deeper into these conditions, starting with coma.
Okay, so coma is essentially a state of complete unresponsiveness, right? It's like the brain has just completely gone offline.
Exactly. It's usually caused by a severe brain injury or dysfunction of the ascending reticular activating system, which is responsible for regulating our sleep-wake cycles and arousal. So someone in a coma, they show no signs of awareness or wakefulness, no response to stimuli, and their eyes remain closed.
And coma is typically temporary, right? It's like the brain is in a kind of protective mode while it heals.
In most cases, yeah. Coma usually lasts for a few weeks at most, and the outcome can vary pretty widely. Some individuals make a full recovery, while others may transition into different states of consciousness.
So what happens if someone emerges from a coma, but they still don't seem to be aware of their surroundings?
That's when we might see what's called a vegetative state. In this condition, the individual's eyes may be open, and they may even exhibit sleep-wake cycles, but they still don't show any meaningful responses to their environment. It's like their body is awake, but their mind is absent.
That must be incredibly difficult for families to witness, seeing their loved one awake but not truly there. Is there any hope for recovery in a vegetative state?
It's a complex question,
Yeah.
and there's no easy answer. The chances of recovery really depend on a lot of factors, including the extent of the brain damage and the individual's age and their overall health. Some individuals may transition to what's called a minimally conscious state, where they show these intermittent signs of awareness.
So in a minimally conscious state, there's like a glimmer of awareness, but it's still very limited and inconsistent.
Precisely. They might respond to their name, follow simple commands, or even track objects with their eyes. But these responses are often fleeting, and they can be really difficult to distinguish from just, reflexive behaviors.
This really highlights the challenge of accurately assessing consciousness in these patients. Even really subtle behaviors can be significant, but they can also be misinterpreted.
Absolutely. It's crucial to have specialized medical professionals, who have experience in evaluating these conditions to make accurate diagnoses and then guide treatment decisions.
Now, what about locked-in syndrome? That sounds absolutely terrifying, to be fully aware but completely trapped inside your own body.
It's a very challenging condition. Individuals with locked-in syndrome are fully conscious, they're aware of their surroundings, but they're completely paralyzed and often only able to communicate through eye movements or blinking.
It's like being buried alive, but with your mind still fully active. It must be incredibly frustrating and isolating.
It is, and it really underscores the importance of not equating physical responsiveness with consciousness. Someone may appear completely unresponsive, but still have a rich inner world of thoughts and feelings. Imagine being able to understand everything happening around you, but being completely unable to express yourself or interact with the world.
It's a stark reminder that our brains are incredibly complex, and consciousness is a fragile and often very elusive phenomenon. This all makes me think about near-death experiences, or NDEs, which we haven't really touched on yet. People who have had these experiences, they often report like leaving their bodies and having these profound, sometimes even mystical encounters. Is there any like scientific explanation for these phenomena?
NDEs are fascinating and deeply personal experiences, and they've really captured the human imagination for centuries. While there's no single definitive explanation, Researchers have proposed several theories that try to, ground these experiences in neurobiology.
So we're not talking about souls floating around or anything like that.
Not in the traditional sense. Some researchers suggest that NDEs are hallucinations,
Mm.
They're caused by oxygen deprivation or just changes in brain chemistry during a life-threatening event.
So it's like the brain's way of making sense of a really chaotic and overwhelming situation, creating a kind of internal narrative to like cope with the experience.
That's one possibility. Others have pointed to the role of the temporal parietal junction, or the TPJ, which we talked about earlier. Remember how it's involved in our sense of self and body image? Disruptions or stimulation of this area can actually induce out-of-body experiences, which are a very common feature of NDEs.
That's incredible. It suggests that these experiences, however profound they may feel, are still rooted in the physical workings of the brain.
Exactly, yeah. And it opens up this whole new avenue for understanding these experiences, not as supernatural events, but as products of our, incredibly complex and adaptable brains.
It seems like the more we learn about the brain, the more mysterious it becomes. We've explored these various disorders of consciousness and touched on the mysteries of NDEs. What other insights can these sources offer about the nature of consciousness?
One key theme that really emerges from this material is the idea of the brain as this dynamic, self-organizing system. Consciousness isn't something that's like simply located in a specific part of the brain. It arises from this complex interplay of many different brain regions, each contributing to the overall, symphony of awareness.
It's like an orchestra, where each individual instrument contributes to a larger unified sound. You can't isolate the flute and say, well, that's where the music comes from. It's the interplay of all the instruments together that creates the magic.
That's a brilliant analogy. And just as an orchestra can play different types of music, the brain can give rise to different states of consciousness, from wakefulness to sleep to dreaming. Each state is characterized by these distinct patterns of neural activity and connectivity.
And these patterns are constantly changing, influenced by our experiences, our emotions, even just our environment. It's not a static thing. Consciousness is this dynamic process. It's a constant dance of information and interaction within the brain.
Precisely. And just as a dance can be fluid and graceful or chaotic and erratic, so too can consciousness. We can experience these moments of clarity and focus, and then we can drift into states of confusion or disorientation. Understanding consciousness requires looking not just at the structure of the brain, but also at its dynamic processes, how those patterns of activity ebb and flow.
So we need to study both the hardware and the software, so to
Yeah.
speak. And that's where techniques like neuroimaging and electrophysiology become so crucial. They allow us to observe the brain in action and see how different regions are communicating with each other in real time.
Exactly. These tools are revolutionizing our understanding of the brain, allowing us to see this symphony of consciousness playing out in real time. But as you pointed out earlier, these technologies have their limitations. We're still just scratching the surface of this incredibly complex and mysterious organ.
It's both humbling and exhilarating to realize just how much we still don't know about something as fundamental as consciousness. But that's what makes it so exciting. Each new discovery opens up new questions and new avenues for exploration.
You've hit the nail on the head. Consciousness is truly one of the greatest mysteries in science, and it's likely to keep researchers busy for generations to come. But that's what makes it so captivating. Each new insight brings us closer to understanding the essence of what it means to be human.
Okay, so we've explored disorders of consciousness, near-death experiences, and the very dynamic nature of the brain. What else do these sources reveal about the intricacies of consciousness?
Well, remember earlier we discussed the possibility that even simple systems, like photodiodes, could potentially exhibit a minimal level of consciousness, at least according to integrated information theory. It's a pretty speculative idea, I'll grant you, but it's one worth considering.
I have to admit, that concept is still kind of swirling around in my mind.
Yeah.
So you're saying that my phone, with its circuits and transistors, could have some degree of conscious experience. I thought we kind of established that was a bit far-fetched.
It's certainly a mind-bending concept, and as I said, there's no definitive evidence to support it yet. But integrated information theory suggests that consciousness arises from the amount of integrated information within a system, regardless of its physical makeup. So if the system is structured in a way that allows for a certain level of integrated information, it could theoretically have some rudimentary form of conscious experience.
So if a photodiode, which is basically just a light sensor, is arranged in a way that allows for a high degree of interconnectedness and information flow, It could theoretically have some degree of consciousness. It's like saying that consciousness isn't limited to biological systems. It could potentially emerge in any system that reaches a certain threshold of complexity and integration.
That's the essence of the theory.
Hmm.
Of course, this kind of consciousness would be vastly different from our own, you know. It'd be incredibly basic, limited to perhaps a simple awareness of light and darkness. We're not talking about, like, photodiodes having feelings or thoughts or anything like that.
But it still raises some really profound philosophical questions, doesn't it? If consciousness isn't confined to brains and biological systems, what does that mean for our understanding of the universe and our place in it?
It really challenges our assumptions about the nature of consciousness and its place in the cosmos. It suggests that consciousness might be a much more fundamental property of reality than we previously thought, potentially woven into the fabric of the universe itself.
Okay, my mind is officially doing backflips. So we've got disorders of consciousness, near-death experiences, the dynamic brain, and now the possibility of consciousness in simple systems. Where do we go from here? This deep dive is getting pretty deep.
Well, let's maybe shift gears a bit and focus on the challenges of actually studying consciousness and explore some of the limitations of current research methods. We can also delve into the ethical considerations surrounding disorders of consciousness and discuss the implications of our growing understanding of the brain for fields like, artificial intelligence and philosophy.
Sounds like we've got a lot more ground to cover. Stay tuned, listeners, as we continue our exploration of the very enigmatic world of consciousness. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into consciousness. It feels like we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, it's true. The more we explore, the more we realize how much there is to discover.
Yeah.
But I guess that's the beauty of science, right? It's a journey of endless exploration.
Right, exactly.
So building on what we've already talked about, let's dive into some of the challenges that researchers face when they're trying to understand this really enigmatic phenomenon, consciousness.
Okay, yeah. So we've got all these incredible tools like neuroimaging, electrophysiology, allowing us to kind of peek inside the brain. But it's not like a perfect view, is it?
No, they definitely have their limitations. It's kind of like trying to understand how this vast, intricate clock works, but you can only see a few of its gears.
Right, right.
Yeah. Take fMRI, for example. It's really powerful. It lets us see which areas of the brain are active during different tasks. But it's important to remember that we're not actually directly observing neural activity.
Right.
What we're measuring is blood flow, which is just a proxy for that activity.
Hmm.
It's kind of like trying to understand a conversation by observing the traffic patterns outside a building.
I see what you mean.
You might get a general sense of what's going on, but you're missing all the nuances, the dialogue.
Right. So we're getting a glimpse of the overall activity, but we're missing all the finer details of the neural conversations that are happening inside.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's almost like listening to a symphony from outside the concert hall. You can hear the music, but you can't tell which instruments are playing which parts.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where techniques like electroencephalography or EEG come in.
Right.
EEG measures the brain's electrical activity directly, giving us this more fine-grained view of neural communication. But even EEG has its limitations, especially in its spatial resolution. We can see when things are happening with really great precision.
Right.
But pinpointing exactly where in the brain those signals are coming from, that can be difficult.
It seems like every tool has its strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
They offer a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole picture.
Right, right.
But even beyond those technological limitations, there's also the fundamental challenge of subjectivity, isn't there? Consciousness is this inherently first-person experience. We can observe brain activity, we can observe behavior, but we can't directly access another person's inner world of, thoughts and feelings.
That's really the heart of the matter, isn't it?
Yeah.
We can study the brain from the outside, but we can never truly know what it's like to be another person, to actually experience the world through their senses and their unique consciousness. It's like, trying to understand the taste of a particular fruit just by looking at its chemical composition.
Right. Which actually brings us to those ethical considerations surrounding disorders of consciousness that we talked about before. These conditions raise such profound questions about what it means to be conscious and, how we even determine someone's level of awareness when they can't communicate with us.
Yeah, that's one of the most challenging aspects of this whole field, really. How do we make these, really big decisions about life-sustaining therapies when we're not even sure if the person is conscious or not? How can
Ah,
we be sure that individuals with disorders of consciousness are treated with dignity and respect, even when they can't, advocate for themselves?
yeah.
These questions require really careful consideration of the individual's medical condition, their prior wishes, and the values and beliefs of, their loved ones.
It's a huge responsibility, and it really highlights the need for ongoing research to, develop even better tools for assessing consciousness and improving the lives of people with these conditions. But the implications of our understanding of consciousness go way beyond the clinical setting, don't they?
Oh, for sure.
Like, this knowledge has the potential to change how we think about everything from artificial intelligence to the very nature of reality.
Absolutely. Think about the field of artificial intelligence. Like,
Yeah.
if we can better understand how consciousness emerges from the brain, could we one day create artificial systems that are also conscious? And if so, what would that mean for how we relate to those creations? Would they have rights and responsibilities like humans do?
Mm.
These questions, they used to be just science fiction, but they're becoming real-world concerns pretty quickly.
It's both exciting and, I don't know, a little bit daunting to think about, all the possibilities and the potential consequences.
Yeah.
And beyond AI, our understanding of consciousness has huge implications for, like, philosophy, psychology, and even just like our understanding of the universe.
Mm.
It forces us to really reconsider what it means to be human, what it means to be aware, and whether consciousness is this like unique feature of biological systems or maybe a more fundamental property of the cosmos.
It's a journey of exploration that's really only just begun. And the discoveries that we make along the way, I think, are definitely going to challenge our assumptions and, reshape how we understand ourselves and the universe that we live in.
Wow. This deep dive has taken us from the like microscopic workings of neurons to the grand mysteries of consciousness. And I feel like I have a whole new perspective on, what it means to be a thinking, feeling, experiencing being. This has been a really mind-expanding experience.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure exploring these concepts with you. And remember, even though we might not have all the answers right now, the pursuit of understanding consciousness is a journey that's absolutely worth taking. It challenges us intellectually, ethically, and even spiritually.
That's so true. And to all our listeners out there, don't stop exploring. Read those books, listen to podcasts, have those conversations and keep those minds curious. The more we learn about consciousness, the more we learn about ourselves and the universe we live in. So keep diving deep, keep questioning, and who knows what amazing discoveries are out there just waiting to be made.